Chapter 1. Anne Shirley and Diana Barry are wrapping up summer in the orchard at Green Gables, but the whole vibe is giving major seasonal depression as autumn rolls in with roaring seas and fading leaves. Everybody's crying over Miss Lavendar's wedding, and the local minister moving away, leaving the manse looking like a total ghost town. Anne is low-key stressing about leaving for Redmond College next week while coping with the tragic sacrilege of Marilla and her cleaning out the iconic, legendary spare room. Meanwhile, little Davy is out here throwing tantrums because he missed out on seeing Dora take a horrific swan dive down the cellar stairs, and low-key asking Anne if she's going to college just to pull a man. Anne later bumps into Gilbert on the bridge, who gives her serious main character energy by trying to be smooth, but she immediately bails because things are getting way too awkward and situationship-coded. Chapter 2. The Avonlea Village Improvement Society throws a farewell party at Josie Pye's house for Anne and Gilbert, where everyone is suspiciously nice, except for Josie, who still manages to throw backhanded compliments about Anne's new dress. Moody Spurgeon reads an excessively formal speech, and they actually gift Anne a Shakespeare book and Gilbert a fountain pen. Things instantly flop when Gilbert tries to slide in with more cringe romantic small talk, so Anne retaliates by ghosting him to walk home with Charlie Sloane, realizing too late that Charlie is an absolute NPC and total bore. The next day, Gilbert redeems himself by taking Anne to find a secret, feral apple tree deep in the woods where they vibe peacefully, while Mrs. Lynde and Marilla sit back like toxic aunties predicting their eventual marriage. Chapter 3. Monday morning arrives with zero chill, bringing a torrential downpour and absolute gloom as Anne prepares to leave for college. Breakfast is a certified tragedy where Davy is straight up sobbing into his porridge while Dora unbotheredly eats everyone else's food like an absolute icon. After dodging Davy's dramatic hiding spot in the clothes closet, Anne dips with Diana in the pouring rain to meet up at the Bright River station, where Charlie Sloane and Gilbert are already waiting for the train to take them away from Avonlea forever. Anne survives the tearful, rain-drenched departure from Green Gables, dodging Davy's dramatic closet lockdown and enduring Charlie Sloane's insufferable, seasick energy on the boat, before finally arriving in Kingsport, where Priscilla rescues her and introduces her to their delightfully chaotic landladies, the Harvey twins, setting her up with a room right across from the historical Old St. John's Cemetery. Chapter 4. After surviving an overwhelming first day of registration at Redmond, where everyone feels majorly insignificant, Anne and Priscilla explore the eerie, tree-lined St. John's graveyard and instantly vibe with Philippa Gordon, a chaotic, self-proclaimed indecisive queen from Bolingbroke who babbles hilariously about her elite aesthetic, her hatred of great aunts, and her desperate inability to choose between two simping beaus named Alec and Alonzo. Chapter 5. After 3 weeks of feeling completely displaced in Kingsport, the freshmen finally lock in and find their rhythm, securing an epic W in the annual arts rush thanks to Gilbert's strategic masterclass, which earns him the presidency of the freshman class and an elite invite to the Lambs Club, forcing him to complete a humiliating initiation by parading through town in a ridiculously flowered kitchen apron and sunbonnet. Meanwhile, Anne and Priscilla easily slide into top-tier campus social circles thanks to Philippa Gordon, a rich, wildly popular, and stunning Blue-Nose heiress who casually adopts them both, while Phil spends her time juggling a massive roster of obsessed simps, including her eternal pen pals Alec and Alonzo. Anne lives for the weekly lore drops from home, though her mood gets temporarily fried by Jane Andrews' dry crochet updates, Ruby Gillis's cringe postscript about Gilbert writing to her, and Mrs. Lynde's aggressively unhinged letters reporting local gossip, church drama, and Mr. Harrison's runaway pig crashing a minister through a brook. Chapter 6. On a crisp Saturday afternoon, Anne, Priscilla, Phil, Gilbert, and Charlie Sloane take a scenic autumn stroll through the park, where Phil confesses her ongoing chaos with Alec and Alonzo, while the rest brutally roast Charlie's infamously goggled eyes behind his back. The crew wanders past the harbor and up Spofford Avenue to discover an absolute architectural masterpiece, a tiny, vine-covered, unpretentious cottage nestled among mansions called Patty's Place, which instantly gives Anne a massive presentiment that she and this quaint little home are destined to cross paths again. Chapter 7. Christmas exams finally roll around, and Anne, Gilbert, and Phil all secure impressive bags at the top of the freshman class before Anne boards the train back to Avonlea. Despite Phil's frantic attempts to drag her to Bolingbroke for a social whirlwind of high-end dances, Anne proudly chooses her cozy, low-key farmhouse roots. She gets a wildly cinematic homecoming greeted by a massive kerosene-fueled bonfire, Davy's terrifying Indian war whoop, Marilla's emotionally suppressed hugs, and Mrs. Lynde's motherly energy, instantly proving that no college hype could ever compete with the unmatched vibes of Old Friends and Green Gables. While crashing at Green Gables, Anne gets caught up in local lore, helping ventilate Miss Lavendar's newly abandoned Echo Lodge with Diana, before getting blindsided by the most unromantic disaster imaginable, a midnight sleepover where Jane Andrews casually pitches her clunky brother Billy as a husband, complete with a proxy marriage proposal that leaves Anne simultaneously cackling and mourning the death of her high fantasy romantic dreams. Chapter 8. Anne processes the sheer comedy of Billy Andrews wanting her to lock it down for his upper farm, keeping the awkward secret locked tight to avoid hurting Jane's feelings, while privately grieving the absolute lack of main character aura in her first ever proposal, which instead played out like a local real estate transaction. Chapter 9. The second term at Redmond. Absolute whizzes by as Anne grindsets her way toward the Thorburn Scholarship in English to save Marilla's bank account, successfully fending off a random horde of brainy simps, until Charlie Sloane commits social suicide by dropping an intensely unhinged and cringe proposal on her while sitting straight on Miss ADA's favorite embroidered cushion. Anne shuts him down with lethal precision, triggering a massive teenage beef that leaves Charlie icing her out for a full year. Meanwhile, Stella Maynard sends a chaotic letter recounting the absolute nightmare of being a backcountry schoolmarm and pitches an elite group house plan in Kingsport, with her legendary Aunt Jimsy, sending Anne and Priscilla straight into a frantic high-stakes house hunt. Chapter 10. Anne and Priscilla pay a visit to Patty's place on Spofford Avenue, where they are greeted by Miss Patty Spofford, her niece Maria, and two iconic, 100-year-old China dogs named Gog and Magog. After Miss Patty realizes Anne genuinely loves the quaint cottage rather than just wanting a trendy address, she agrees to rent it to them for an affordable price before setting off on a European globe-trotting tour, sending the girls into a state of absolute euphoria that only multiplies when an exhausted Phil begs to move in with them, agreeing to share chores and follow a strict Friday-only calling hours rule. Chapter 11. Anne returns to Avonlea sporting the Thorburn Scholarship, only to realize time doesn't stand still as she faces local changes like old residents passing away, Billy Andrews happily marrying Nettie Blewett after his previous rejection, and the heartbreaking reality that Ruby Gillis is secretly wasting away from galloping consumption while aggressively pretending she is completely fine and planning future parties. Amidst paying awkward visits to the insufferable Aunt Atossa and watching local gossip unfold, Anne gets inspired by her college peers to try her hand at writing an actual published short story, choosing the protagonist's name Avril Lester. Chapter 12. Anne fully locks in on crafting her debut short story, agonizing over character arcs and naming the hero Percival Dalrymple, while letting Diana officially name the minor core boy Robert Ray, all while chasing the high-stakes dream of literary fame and publication in a major magazine. Chapter 13. Davy hits a breaking point with Mrs. Lynde's constant hovering, and low-key bosses Dora into a rebellious Sunday of playing truant, sneaking off to fish with the wild cottons, and hurling his collection money over a fence, only to spend his entire evening suffering from a massive wave of soul-crushing guilt and confessing his entire crime spree to a half-asleep Anne. Chapter 14. Anne spends her summer evenings visiting a rapidly fading Ruby Gillis, who finally drops her bubbly, boy-obsessed act while looking out at the moonlit graveyard and tearfully confesses to Anne that she is terrified of dying because heaven isn't going to be anything like the frivolous, party-filled life she was used to. Chapter 15. Anne's literary clout gets utterly flipped into a dystopian nightmare when Mr. Harrison casually spoils that her mysterious contest entry was actually sent in by Diana to the Rollings Reliable Baking Powder Company, forcing Anne to stare down the soul-crushing realization that her high-fantasy romantic masterpiece Avril's Atonement has officially been weaponized to shill household baking supplies alongside a $25 check. Chapter 16. The Girl Boss Squad successfully establishes Patty's place on Spofford Avenue with Aunt Jamesina, completely ignoring Miss Patty's strict wallpaper rules, while dodging local Avonlea gossip about Anne's prize-winning baking powder saga and accidentally adopting an unhinged, battle-scarred stray cat named Rusty, who survives an attempted chloroform execution and goes on to violently assert dominance over the entire neighborhood's feline population, including a multicolored disaster named Joseph and a hyper-dignified mouser known as the Sarah Cat, who eventually turn from mortal enemies into cuddling besties. Chapter 17. November rolls in with frosty charm as the crew settles into domestic life, quickly capped off by a gloriously unhinged letter from Davy back in Avonlea, detailing Mrs. Lynde's catastrophic cellar stair faceplant, his own chaotic Thanksgiving feast survival, a wildly misogynistic school composition on his dream wife, Mr. Harrison's multiple failed attempts to permanently delete his immortal dog, and an endless barrage of deeply invasive theological questions regarding Noah's Ark, local sheep-stealing grandpas, and the mysterious lineage of the devil. Chapter 18. Christmas Vacation turns into a frozen, miserable nightmare, as Anne is trapped at Green Gables by a historic blizzards and drifts apocalypse, forcing her to endure endless family speculation about her future, lonely moments staring across desolate snowfields, and Davy's continuous roasting of biblical patriarchs, all until a massive plot twist arrives in the mail via a lawyer's letter revealing that the late Miss Josephine Barry has left her a cool $1,000 inheritance that completely alters her financial future. Chapter 19. Anne rings in her milestone 20th birthday, curled up on the hearthrug with Rusty, chatting with Aunt Jamesina about aging, character formation, and the supreme magic of yellow silk dresses, while Phil gets all dolled up in creamy yellow lace for a high society dance, casually debating the merits of her endless roster of suitors: Alec, Alonzo, Will Leslie, George Parker, and Mar Holworthy. before flouncing out the door and leaving the two older-fashioned darlings to keep the fortress. Chapter 20. Spring breezes bring high-key tension as Anne tries to escape the looming dread of the future by diving into Dickens at Patty's place, only to get ambushed by Gilbert in the orchard while hunting for Arbutus, where he finally drops the ultimate relationship ultimatum and asks her to marry him. A panicking Anne completely shuts him down with the "we are just friends" speech, leaving Gilbert completely shattered and effectively nuking their entire friendship dynamic right then and there. Chapter 21. Anne spends a chaotic fortnight in Bolingbroke riding a whirlwind of high society jamborees with Phil's squad, but the absolute highlight is her emotional pilgrimage to her tiny, yellow birthplace house and the local graveyard where she tracks down a sacred, dust-covered packet of her late parents' love letters that finally helps her feel like she is no longer an orphan. Chapter 22. Anne abruptly bails on her final day at college a bit early, opting to walk the breezy May-scented roads back to Green Gables, where a surprisingly emotional Marilla warmly welcomes her home, while Davy immediately launches into a hyperactive barrage of missing tooth sales, echo-nymph theories, and his grand plans to marry schoolmate Stella Fletcher. Chapter 23. Avonlea summer vibes hit peak bliss as Anne hangs out with Paul Irving and a proudly un-Yankee-ified Charlotta IV at Echo Lodge. Though a bittersweet reality check hits when Paul discovers he has officially outgrown his magical shore friends and can no longer summon the Twin Sailors or the Golden Lady. Chapter 24. Phil sends a wildly unhinged late-night letter detailing her summer at a select Prospect Point boarding house filled with doom and gloom hypochondriacs, laughing old ladies, and an extraordinarily ugly theological student named Jonas Blake whose shockingly profound sermon completely rattles her brain and leaves her terrified that she's actually falling for a poor, lank theologue. Chapter 25. Anne flees a rainy November afternoon for the park to blow the fogs out of her soul, only to have her umbrella invert in a savage gust and get rescued by a tall, dark, and devastatingly handsome upperclassman named Royal Gardner, who swoops in like an absolute literary protagonist and bombards her with Redmond, white and scarlet colors, glowing romantic poetry, and a dozen magnificent roses that leave her swimming in dreamy high society validation. Chapter 26. Patty's place buzzes with junior reception prep, as Anne rocks a custom-embroidered rosebud silk dress with white orchids from Roy, only to get completely sideswiped at the dance by the sudden, soul-crushing realization that Gilbert Blythe is head over heels obsessed with a stunning, raven-haired rival named Christine Stewart, who completely eclipses her mood and ruins the entire evening's vibe. Chapter March 27th. Winds blow in final exam, panic, and sweet romantic confessions as Phil casually drops the bomb that she has officially said yes to the lank, ugly duckling theological student Jonas Blake, planning to bravely trade her infinite wealth for a tiny slum mission and a new life as a dedicated little candlestick, while Anne stubbornly insists she is totally fine and super happy with her rich, poetic, but utterly humorless Roy. Chapter June 28th rolls back into Avonlea with blooming orchards, miserable 10-year-old arithmetic meltdowns from Davy, and heavy local gossip about Diana's upcoming wedding to the hopelessly good Fred Wright, leaving Anne sitting alone by the Dryad's bubble in the starlit dusk with a weird nagging ache in her heart, because Gilbert has vanished into the newspaper office without a word, and her grand romance feels completely hollow. Chapter 29. As summer brings heart-wrenching nostalgia and the terrifying reality that childhood besties must inevitably grow up and change, Anne serves as a stellar bridesmaid at Diana's massive old-timey wedding while walking the aisle with Gilbert, only to end up wandering Lover's Lane in the moonlight and feeling a crushing sense of ancient maturity while realizing her old Avonlea life is slipping away forever. Chapter 30. Anne escapes to Valley Road for a summer teaching gig, getting chauffeured through the dust by a 200-pound mail-delivering newlywed named Mrs. Skinner, who casually drops the most savage romantic wisdom about dumping a wealthy guy named William Obadiah because he didn't actually love her, proving that a little shack with a broke husband you adore beats a massive house with a loveless corporate sellout any day. Chapter 31. Anne writes a wildly vivid letter to Phil detailing her cozy new boarding digs at Wayside with a sweet, featherbed-loving soul named Janet Sweet, who serves up a terrifying wall decoration lineup of preserved family coffin plates alongside an amusingly deadpan next-door neighbor named Sam Tolliver, who drops legendary peppermint and jumpgrass wisdom over the garden fence. Chapter 32. Valley Road prayer meetings introduce Anne to a stoop-shouldered, incredibly patient local named John Douglas, who eventually escorts Janet home, leading to a high-key awkward dinner at the Douglas homestead where a tiny, angelic, bedridden mother doll named Mrs. Douglas constantly passive-aggressively roasts poor Janet about marriage, while John looks like he is actively getting waterboarded on an ancient torture rack. Chapter 33. Janet breaks down in absolute tears on her 40th birthday because John Douglas has been coming over for 20 straight years without popping the question, prompting Anne to stage a dramatic intervention where Janet tries to show some fierce spirit by blowing him off after prayer meeting, only to throw the whole plan into chaos when John's face contorts in pure agony, and Anne has to aggressively sprint down the moonlight-flooded road to stop him. Chapter 34. Anne's Valley Road monotony gets totally broken when lank, straw-chewing Sam Tolliver casually tries to pull a zero-riz proposal out of nowhere, followed immediately by old Mrs. Douglas actually kicking the bucket for real, which finally prompts John Douglas to march over and dump 20 years of suppressed trauma on Janet by revealing his mom literally blackmailed him with a deathbed promise never to propose, leading to a wholesome engagement and zero dramatic regrets. Chapter 35. The ultimate senior year at Redmond kicks off with major main character energy as Phil flexes her rock-solid engagement to Joe Blake, despite her mom's total meltdown. Aunt Jimsina drops legendary widower beau lore while hurting the girls, and Anne spends a rainy November night laughing her absolute soul out over old, aggressively dramatic Story Club manuscripts like My Graves, before stumbling upon an old wrapping paper sketch that sparks a massive, low-key plot twist. Chapter 36. Anne's literary ambitions get a massive dopamine boost when the youth's friend accepts an old rewritten sketch and sends her a clean $10 check, which she celebrates right before getting ambushed at Patty's place by Mrs. Gardner and her haughty daughter Aline, whose snobby vibes are only saved by sweet Dorothy Gardner and a chaotic cat chase where Rusty and Joseph leap into laps, culminating in poor Priscilla's chocolate cake getting utterly vaporized beneath Aline's unwitting posterior on the Inglenook sofa. Chapter 37. Final exams vaporize the girls' brains before they finally graduate as fully certified BAs, with high honors in English, classics, and math, leading to a nostalgic convocation day where Anne ditches Roy's pretentious violets for Gilbert's sentimental lilies of the valley and fastens a secret pink enamel heart around her neck, only to have Phil casually crush her soul with neighborhood gossip that Gilbert's engagement to Christine Stewart is about to drop immediately. Chapter 38. Packing up the iconic blue room at Patty's place fills the girls with heavy, tearful nostalgia. But the real plot twist hits when Roy Gardner proposes in the Harbor Pavilion, and Anne suddenly suffers a massive psychological reality check, realizing she doesn't actually love him and flat out rejecting him, leaving her drowning in self-disgust and humiliation until Phil gently reminds her that real life is way messier than a novel. Chapter 39. Anne returns to a slightly altered Green Gables to find her beloved Snow Queen cherry tree blown down in a March gale and Diana busy with married life. But her post-breakup trauma eases up just a bit when Dorothy Gardner casually drops the tea that Roy has already dramatically survived 2 previous romantic rejections, proving that his broken heart will heal way faster than Anne originally feared. Chapter 40. The summer brings sweet visits with the Irvings at Echo Lodge, but the vibe instantly shatters when Davy casually drops the soul-crushing news that Gilbert is dying of typhoid fever, plunging Anne into a night of pure agonizing vigil in her old room where she finally realizes she's madly in love with him, leading to the ultimate plot twist the next morning when ragged Pacific Bote strolls down the lane and casually confirms Gilbert took the turn for the better. Chapter 41. Anne and Gilbert finally take that long-awaited ramble through Hester Gray's autumn-touched garden, where Gilbert drops the definitive proposal, leading Anne to happily drop all her old delusions about Roy and enthusiastically lock in a multi-year engagement while walking home into the sunset together as absolute main characters.